And once again, thank you so much for joining our webinar. As you know, Chabad House Johannesburg is on a mission to get every single family my parasha book and to spend time fulfilling the mitzvah of Shenantam Levanecha, to teach your children Torah. It was one of the mitzvahim of the Rebbe. And in order to help us understand the parasha, we have the legendary Rabbi Alex Carlebach, who's going to just give us an insight into the parasha for 15, 20 minutes. And we will be able to share it with our kids on Shabbos. Anybody who knows anybody who's not at a Jewish school, who has kids at school, please let us know, and we will get them this beautiful parasha book as long as they undertake to learn the parasha for a few minutes with their kids. Have a good week, and Alex, over to you.
Thank you so much, Rav Masinta. And I would encourage everyone to get that parasha book, especially under the conditions they are offering it. By the way, this week, there's a difference once again between Israel and outside Israel, though this is the last week that there is such a difference. So we are going to read the double portion, Matos and Masei, with which we have Chazak, Chazak, Finis, Chazek. We finished the book of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers, whereas in Israel, they read Matos last week, they read Masei this week, and then next week, which is the Shabbos of Tisha B'Av, called Shabbos Chazoin, and that is the portion of Devarim every week. So from now on, we are up to Israel as well. It's a different discussion as to why, what, and where. Matos, the first portion, means tribes, and it's talking about the laws of vows, and it's talking about conquering the Transjordan and how they gave the 2.5 tribes the Transjordan, Reuven, Gad, and half of Manasseh. And now we get to the second portion, Masei. Masei means journeys. And it says, Ve'ele Masei b'nei Yisrael, these are the journeys of the Jewish people as they left Egypt. And if you count up, you will see there are 42 places enumerated. The Mem Beis Masois, the 42 journeys. And this is such an important lesson. The Baal Shem Tov teaches us that life is a journey, and every single person has 42 Mem Beis Masois in his life. It goes up and down, as we'll discuss shortly. Now, the question that many ask is, it says, Eile Masei, these are the journeys of the Jewish people leaving Egypt. But the question that is asked is, it wasn't 42 journeys to leave Egypt. It was only one journey. Once you left the Egyptian border, you're out of Egypt. So why does it say 42 journeys to leave Egypt? And that is addressed in your book on page 184. And one of the answers is that the word Mitzrayim means boundaries, limitations. And this is teaching us that in life, every person has what they could call their comfort zone, what they are comfortable with, and this becomes their boundary and their limitation. But God doesn't want us to be comfortable with this. He wants us to grow each time, going beyond your limitation. And that is the Mem Beis Masois, the 42 journeys, because each one, you're leaving your Mitzrayim, your personal restriction and limitation, and growing in the service of God. And so, as he points out, they had to become freer and freer, nobler and purer, first to receive the Torah and then to go further and to go out of your Egypt. And that, says the teaching, doesn't only apply to your negative, it applies even to your positive, because that could also be a limitation. You have to go further. And as he points out in page 185, that one should be ambitious for holiness. And about that, there's such a beautiful teaching of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. The previous Lubavitcher Rebbe says, do you know one of the problems with human beings is that when it comes to physical things, they're always looking for better. And they're looking at people who are better off than them. For example, if you just put in the brand new dream kitchen, and then you hear, Rachel has even a nicer kitchen, you say, oh, you think this is a kitchen? They have a much better kitchen. You think this is a car? They have a much better car. So in physical things, we're always looking at people who are better off than us. In spiritual matters, he says, we are looking at people who are worse off than us. You say, you think I'm bad? At least I have a kosher home. The guy up the road doesn't even have that. At least I go to shul every Friday night. The guy up the road doesn't even do that. But if rather in physical things, we would look at people who are worse than us. At least my car, it might not be the best car, but at least when I put the key in, it starts every time. The guy up the road has so many car problems. So you look at people who are worse off, and when it comes to spiritual, you look at people who are better off. I only go to shul Friday night. Maybe I should aspire to be like my neighbor who goes Shabbos morning as well. I only put on tefillin 3 times a week. Maybe I should be aspiring to the guy who puts on every day of the week besides Shabbos and Shiurim, etc. Then he says you would be a happier person and you would become much more fulfilled. And so that's what he talks about. The journeys, the Masei B'nai Yisrael, that when it comes to spiritual things, we should always be looking for the journeys. Now, Rashi points out that why doesn't it specify the 42 journeys? And he points out that the first 14 journeys were in the first year. And then there were 8 journeys that they went back. After Aaron passed away, they went back. So if you add together the 14 and the 8, that's 22 missing already, which means in the 40 years that the Jews traveled in the desert, besides the first year, that's only 20 places. So most of the time, they were actually settled and growing. Why does it talk about going back, the travels that went back? And part of the reason is because life is not always going forward. As he says on page 186, it mentions about the complaints of the water in Mara, Korach's rebellion, and many other negative aspects that they came up with in the desert. But they are listed as part of the uplifting journey of the Jewish people to Israel, because even our negative is part and parcel of our life's journey and who we become. When we learn from our mistakes and we resolve not to repeat them, that failure can become part of our spiritual growth. And so that's what we have to remember, that it is not only positive aspects that makes us into the person. That's what human is all about. And it is part of our spirituality, our teshuvah as well. And he tells a beautiful story, how we always have to grow and go further, even once we reach a level of holiness. And the story he tells is the great Seer of Lublin, the Chayza of Lublin, one of the greatest tzaddikim, one of the greatest Hasidic masters who had prophetic eyes. And when he became a Rebbe, he started to fast more and really take time for teshuvah. And they asked him, before we could understand, you weren't on that level. But why now? When you reached the level of being a Rebbe, did you suddenly feel that you have to do more teshuvah? Or have you become a bigger sinner? And he gave a very insightful answer. He says, the Leviim in the Beis HaMikdash, when they became inducted, a Levi became inducted into the service of the temple, he had to bring a carbon chatos. A carbon chatos, by the way, is a sin offering. You just inducted them into the service and you're calling them sinners. He says, not at all. They aren't sinners. But why do they have to bring that sacrifice? Because once they reached that new great status, they are kept to a higher standard. And what was acceptable for them before they were inducted into godly service is not acceptable anymore. They have to grow. And so says the Chayza Lublin, that applies to me too. Before I was a Rebbe, that was one thing. It was acceptable. Now that I am the spiritual master of so many Hasidim, I have to rise to a much higher level. The Torah is full of descriptions of great tzaddikim. Yet, in the entire 5 books of Torah, only one yahrzeit is mentioned, and it's in this week's portion, interestingly enough. It's not Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. It's not Moshe Rabbeinu, not even Miriam, who is mentioned, or any of the others. The only yahrzeit mentioned is Aaron HaKohen. And that, we read in this week's portion in Masei, came on the 1st of the 5th month, which is Rosh Chodesh Av, says the Torah, in the 40th year of them leaving Egypt, when Aaron was 123 years, he passed away in Har HaHar. And people wonder, why is Aaron HaKohen the only one whose yahrzeit is mentioned in the Parsha number 1? And what is the significance of it being the 1st of Rosh Chodesh Av? As we know, nothing comes by accident. The answer that the Rebbe gives is that we know the first Beis HaMikdash was destroyed because of the 3 primary sins: idolatry, adultery, and murder. Whereas the second Beis HaMikdash, we are told, was destroyed as a result of sinas chinam. Sinas chinam is senseless hatred between one Jew and another. The people who look at others and they just, for some reason, something drives them mad. And they're ready to spread all kinds of rumors, all kinds of lashon haras, to create all faribbles, even though they say we are not a faribbaldik person. But for some reason, this guy just rubs me the wrong way. This is called sinas chinam. And we are told, we are now in the 3 weeks. Tomorrow night is Rosh Chodesh Av. It begins the 9 days. During the 9 days, we do not, besides Shabbos, we don't eat meat, chicken, or drink wine. We don't shower or bathe for pleasure, and many other things. By the way, the reason we don't drink wine is not because it's pleasurable or alcoholic. You can have a beer or a whiskey. The reason for the restrictions of meat and wine is because those were brought in on the temple as a sacrifice. The Nesachim and the karbonos, the libations and the sacrifices. And so to mark the destruction of the temple, we don't have that from tomorrow night till after Tisha B'Av, which is the Monday afterwards. But to build, to rebuild, to bring Mashiach and to rebuild the third temple, that is going to happen as a result of avas chinam, senseless, selfless love, just loving the person because he's your neshama, etc. And that is what Aaron was all about. It's interesting that the Mishnah says, Havit Talmidov shel Aaron, we should be from the students of Aaron. And Hillel says, Oyhev Shalom, Roidev Shalom, Oyefes Abrius, Umakarvan Latera, which means we should love peace, we should pursue peace, we should love people and bring them close to Torah. This is the greatest thing. Now think about this. Aaron was the high priest. He was the first Kohen Gadol of the Jewish people. He was the messenger between the people and God. Moshe Rabbeinu was the messenger, bringing godliness down to the people. Aaron was the messenger, bringing the people up to God. And yet, that is not what he is acclaimed for. What he is acclaimed for is loving peace and bringing peace. And that is that he was a man of the people. He would hear about the faribbles that friends had. He would hear about the machlokes that husbands and wives had. And as we discussed in a previous year, the Gemara says he would go out of his way, putting aside his own ego and saying to one another, he apologized. He asked me to apologize on his behalf. Become friends again. He would do everything in his power to be able to create peace. And that's what he did between families and between all. You know, on a little humorous side, my mother of blessed memory told us children before she passed away, you kids should thank God I'm not leaving you enough to fight over. There are so many reasons. People fight. Families get into faribbles. It is usually because of ego. Aaron Cohen taught us to all put aside our egos, not only in our own lives, but to put it aside to make peace between one another. We are in the 3 weeks, beginning the 9 days. The Rebbe encouraged us to make siyumim. The Rebbe encouraged us to learn the laws of the Beis HaMikdash. And let us do our bit. First of all, to have peace in our own lives, peace between families, peace between communities, peace between all Jews. And there is no doubt that this will bring Mashiach speedily in our day. I'd just like to point out that we are now in the middle of what is called Shloisha de Puranisa, the 3 weeks of consequence. We started last week, even though we read Parshas Pinchas. The Haftarah we read was the first of the 3 weeks, Divrei Yirmiyahu. This coming Haftarah is the second one, Parshas Masei. It's the Haftarah of Masei. And next week will be Shabbos Chazoin, the vision of Isaiah, with the famous story of the Barditchever, how Hashem shows us the third Beis HaMikdash. Let us all take the message of Aharon Cohen, take the message of this Parsha, Eila Masei B'nai Yisrael. Let us travel. Let us finally travel on the spiritual path towards Mashiach, towards the third Beis HaMikdash.
Alex, I can't hear you. I don't know if it's just me.
No, okay. And let us go to Chazak, Chazak, Finis Chazek. Let us strengthen ourselves, become stronger, And through that, may Hashem give us bracha in every aspect towards Mashiach. Thank you.
Rabbi Carlebach, once again, thank you so much for doing this. Everybody, thank you for listening. And please,
The
God,
crowd is growing, Kanayan Hara.
We will see you all, please, God, next week. Have a great week.